I never used to believe in ghosts. I thought horror stories were just stories made up to scare people for fun. But after what happened to me on that school trip, I don't know what to believe anymore. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. My friends, Lily and Jake, and I were crammed onto an old rickety school bus, heading deep into the forest for a camping trip with our class. The bus shook with every pothole it hit, and the air inside smelled like stale gum and damp backpacks. When we finally arrived, the scent of pine and damp soil filled the air as we stepped off the bus. Our sneakers crunched over twigs and leaves as we spent the day hiking, laughing, and exploring. Everything felt normal, safe. By nightfall, we were gathered around a crackling campfire, roasting marshmallows as the flames flickered and cast eerie shadows across our faces. The sweet smell of burning sugar mixed with the smoky scent of wood, creating a warm, cozy atmosphere. But that warmth didn't last. As the night deepened, the forest grew unnervingly silent. The usual chirping of crickets faded, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Daniels, our gruff and no-nonsense teacher, walked around the campsite, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. His voice was rough as he barked out orders. "No wandering off. Stay in your tents," he warned. "If you get lost out here, you'll be in serious trouble." We obeyed, crawling into our tent. The thin nylon walls rustled as we zipped ourselves inside. The air inside was stuffy, filled with the faint odor of sweaty socks and the lingering sweetness of marshmallows. We whispered and joked for a while, but soon, Lily and Jake drifted off to sleep. I didn't. I lay there staring at the ceiling of the tent, illuminated by the faint silver glow of the moon filtering through the fabric. I wasn't scared, but something about the silence outside felt wrong. Then I heard it, a rustling noise. It was soft, like dry leaves brushing against each other. I held my breath, listening. It could have been the wind, but something about it made me uneasy. Slowly, I unzipped the flap just a little and peeked outside. A cold gust of air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of damp moss. My flashlight beam swept across the trees, revealing only rough, gray bark and shadows stretching into the distance. There was nothing there. I let out a quiet sigh. "It's just my imagination," I muttered, shaking my head as I zipped the tent shut again. Then I heard it, a whisper. "Skylar." It was so soft, almost like a breath against my ear. My stomach twisted as a shiver ran down my spine. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned toward Lily and Jake, hoping one of them was playing a prank on me. They were fast asleep. Lily's messy hair was splayed across her pillow, her breath slow and steady. Jake was sprawled out, one arm dangling off his sleeping mat. Neither of them had whispered my name. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. Then I heard it again. "Skylar." This time it was coming from outside the tent. The voice was low, rough, almost as if someone was struggling to speak. A wave of panic surged through me. My hands trembled as I reached for my flashlight, the cold metal slick with sweat. I clicked it on, and the bright beam cut through the darkness as I slowly unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The air felt different, heavier, suffocating. The usual sounds of the forest were gone. No chirping insects, no hooting owls, just thick, unnatural silence. Even the scent in the air had changed. It was no longer fresh with pine and damp earth. Instead, it was thick and sour, carrying the unmistakable stench of decay. I took a slow step forward, my breath coming in short, uneven puffs. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I swung the beam around the trees. That's when I saw it. A shadow. Tall, thin, swaying slightly, though there was no wind. It wasn't moving like a person. It didn't have defined features. It was just darkness. But it was darker than the night itself, a shape that seemed to absorb the light. My breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then the whisper returned, closer this time. "Skylar, come here." The voice curled around me, sending icy tendrils of fear through my body. My legs felt weak, my knees threatening to buckle. I stepped back, my heel catching on a thick root. I fell. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and my flashlight flew from my hand, spinning wildly as it hit the ground. The beam flickered across the trees, illuminating twisted branches that clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight with shaking hands. My heart thundered in my chest as I shone the light toward the trees. Nothing. The shadow was gone, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. I bolted back to the tent, my breath ragged, and zipped myself inside in one frantic motion. I curled into a ball, pressing my back against the nylon wall, listening. The whispers were gone, but sleep never came. When morning arrived, the campsite was blanketed in a thin layer of mist. Lily and Jake woke up groggy, stretching and yawning as if nothing had happened. When I told them what I had seen, they laughed. "You're such a drama queen, Skylar," Jake teased, rolling his eyes. Lily smirked. It was probably just the wind. But then, Mr. Daniels called us over. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. His boots crunched over the damp earth as he pointed to the ground just outside our tent. There, pressed deep into the mud, was a footprint. It was massive, barefoot. The toes were long and splayed unnaturally wide, as if something inhuman had been standing there for hours. Lily and Jake stopped laughing. No one admitted to making it. And as we packed up to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there watching, waiting, whispering my name. Story number 2. I never enjoyed school field trips. The long bus rides were exhausting, the guided tours felt endless, and the teachers constantly reminded us to stay together. It was never as exciting as they made it sound, but this trip was different. We were visiting an old museum, the kind that smelled of dust and forgotten history. The air inside was thick and stale, carrying the weight of time. The faded paintings along the walls depicted solemn figures with hollow eyes that seemed to follow us wherever we moved. Our teacher, Mr. Hensley, spoke in a steady, monotone voice, explaining the significance of various artifacts. His words blended into the background as the dim lighting flickered above us. I was barely paying attention. My stomach had been unsettled since lunch, most likely from the soggy sandwiches they had given us. I raised my hand and quietly asked to use the bathroom. Mr. Hensley glanced at me briefly before nodding his approval. I walked down a long hallway. the sound of my footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The further I went, the quieter everything became. The voices of my classmates grew distant until all I could hear was the faint hum of the flickering lights above me. The hallway felt colder, the air heavier. Finally, I reached the bathroom door. It was made of old wood, its surface worn and rough. As I pushed it open, the hinges creaked loudly in the silence. Inside, the air was damp, carrying a strong bleach-like scent that made my nose sting. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow. The mirrors were cloudy with streaks and fingerprints, reflecting distorted shapes. The tiles on the floor were cracked, some of them missing entirely, revealing dark gaps beneath. I hurried into the last stall and locked the door behind me. The space was cramped, the walls covered in old graffiti. Faint initials and scribbled messages overlapped each other, some of them barely visible through the layers of ink and scratches. I tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine as I finished quickly. Just as I reached for the lock, I heard a sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow and deliberate, like a fingernail dragging across the metal stall door. I froze, my fingers still resting on the lock. "Hello?" I called out softly, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no answer. The only response was the tapping, steady and unbroken. A cold sensation crept over my skin. I hesitated before bending down, my hair brushing against the grimy floor, and peered underneath the stalls. There was nothing. No shoes, no shadows. The bathroom was completely empty. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. I reached for the lock again, twisting it firmly. It wouldn't turn. The lock was stuck. I pulled at it harder, my breathing uneven. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, trying to keep my hands steady. The tapping suddenly stopped. The silence pressed in around me, thick and unnatural. Then, I heard something far worse, a giggle. It was low and raspy, as if someone were choking on dust. The sound came from inside the stall, right behind me. My entire body stiffened. The air around me felt suffocating, thick with something unseen. My chest tightened, and I could feel the presence of something standing there, just inches away. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. With my heart pounding against my ribs, I spun around quickly, my breath catching in my throat. There was nothing there. The stall was empty. The toilet sat unmoving, the walls unchanged, the flickering light above casting erratic shadows. But I knew something had been there. The air still felt wrong. Panic surged through me as I slammed my fists against the door. "Let me out!" I screamed, my voice breaking. I threw my weight against the door, my shoulder aching from the impact. Then, click. The lock turned on its own. The stall door swung open with force, slamming against the wall. I stumbled out, nearly crashing into the sink. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me, wide-eyed, pale and breathing heavily. The bathroom was empty. The stalls stood open. The air was still. The lights buzzed faintly, just as they had before. But something had changed. I ran back to my class, my hands trembling, my heart still racing, when I told my classmates what had happened. They only laughed. "It's just an old building, Mia. You're overreacting," one of them said with a smirk. But later, I overheard Mr. Hensley speaking to the museum guide in a hushed voice. "This building used to be a hospital," the guide explained. There was a nurse who got trapped in that bathroom during a storm. No one could hear her. By the time they found her, she had been scratching at the door, trying to get out. A chill ran down my spine. My mouth went dry. I wanted to believe it had all been in my head, that it was just my imagination. But even now, when I'm alone at night, I can still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And that giggle, it never really left me. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more. Goodbye.